Today, I'm going to talk about a flourishing urban Catholic congregation in Atlantic Canada. And we're going to share two stories. One that I'm going to share is a story of renewal for mission. So there are three circumstances in the context of this case study that came together in the early 2000s that are the background to this story. The first is the amalgamation of Catholic churches in the diocese due to declining numbers of engaged Catholics. The second circumstance is the reports of sexual abuse and the cover-up by clergy in the diocese. And then the third circumstance is the increasing number of immigrants moving into the neighborhood of this church. So what we know nationally is that Atlantic Canadians are more likely to be religiously engaged than people on this end of the country. But we also know that there is a decline of religious engagement across the country. And this too is with Catholics, especially younger generations of Catholics. And so with the decline of Catholic participants at churches, this leads to less money in the coffers. And so the diocese launched a program of amalgamations in the diocese. Around the same time that these amalgamations started, allegations of clergy sexual abuse of children in the diocese surfaced. In the years that followed, several priests were criminally convicted of sexually abusing children as far back as the 1960s. And currently there is a class action suit that is active in the diocese. Media coverage of the clergy sexual abuse locally and around the globe likely exacerbated this decline in Catholic engagement. And finally, the number of immigrants choosing to settle in the Atlantic region began to rise in the early 2000s. Atlantic premiers worked together on the Atlantic immigration program, and our current level of immigration is approximately 6% across the Maritimes. And that may seem very low compared to the rest of the country, but it is noticeable in urban centers. So these three situations, some negative and all potentially disruptive, converge and result in the birth of a new Catholic parish and a new $9.5 million building. The priests that led this process framed the challenging set of circumstances as an opportunity for a new beginning and renewal. According to one of the early pastors in this parish, the process was guided by prayer and consultation. The amalgamation wasn't just about pooling resources, but involved a willingness to try new things, a new way of being new. For many parishioners, this was an exciting, grace-filled time of change. But of course, not everyone was happy. And the author of this church's parish history wrote that some parishioners felt that they had entered an arranged marriage with an unwanted partner. Nevertheless, the proposal went forward. And the process of renewal focused on what is called the new evangelization, which is a consistent theme of Catholic leaders since the Second Vatican Council. And the new evangelization focuses externally on people who have not yet encountered the gospel, and internally on reproposing the gospel to Catholics who have experienced a crisis of faith due to secularization. An early pastor in this parish has written critically of what he calls the maintenance mode of many Catholic churches and argues the need to refocus on revitalizing engagement of Catholics at the parish level. In our case study, we observed two main components of this mission for re-engagement: Alpha and Sunday Mass. So everyone in the parish is invited to enroll in Alpha. One recent Alpha graduate said, "Alpha was life-changing for me because she grew a lot in her faith. She emphasized that the Alpha retreat was very life-filling. The emptiness in your heart, everything. Oh, the Spirit was there for me, answering the questions that I had." Alpha not only renewed cradle Catholics' relationship with God, but deepened their relationships with one another, especially others who had a similar experience of a rekindled faith. Post-Alpha, these relationships are nurtured through a series of life groups in the parish. The second key component of this focus on renewal is Sunday Mass, and it focuses on hospitality, high quality music, and good preaching. And we observe this in all 4 Masses on a Sunday. Everyone who comes through the door of the church is greeted with a warm welcome by ministers of hospitality wearing name tags. The foyer is bright, large, welcoming, and conducive to socialization, both before and after Mass. The Masses are different. Sunday morning Masses feature contemporary music, and the Saturday night Mass has a little bit more of a Catholic book of worship, gather, folk kind of sound to it. And then Sunday evening Mass is a contemplative Mass with more Latin chant and a sung liturgy. The sanctuary features 2 large screens to draw everyone's attention forward, with a few appropriate and strategically placed images, along with the texts for prayers and song. Homilies are well crafted, with an easy to understand theme, rooted in scripture, and memorable messages. This church, which began as a pastoral lab, is also the birthplace of a global Catholic renewal movement called Divine Renovation Ministries. And they now mentor Catholic parishes throughout the world, moving from what they call maintenance to mission. Thus, this urban Catholic church is both the birthplace and leader of a global movement. According to one Life group member, this parish is a light on the hill.
Thank you, Dr. Holtmann. My name is Sam Reimer, Professor of Sociology at Renewal University. So how did this move from maintenance to mission happen for this parish? Visionary leadership, of course, is key to this process. And one sociologist in the U.S., Martin Marty is another one, Gerardo Marty, argued about entrepreneurial leadership in institutions like religious institutions. And his argument was that these were really about changing the culture through the personnel and the structure of the organization. And these organizational leaders were key to this transformation. So how did they move from maintenance to mission? Well, one of the ways they did this was to draw from external models. They used other megachurches, other successful churches to try to figure out how this worked, and they drew external consultants. They even employed people who were from other traditions in order to do things like teach Alpha or Sunday school and these sort of things in order to grow. Everything that they did was restructured toward discipleship. All their programs were now about on-ramps into mission, into discipleship. So catechism classes, first communion, baptism were not child-centered anymore. They were now family-centered. The parents didn't drop off their kids. The parents were expected to come and learn the things that the kids were learning, develop relationships with other parents in the parish, and get involved in things like Alpha. So this became really strategic in the reshaping of this parish. Mobilizing gifted leaders. What surprised Kathy and I constantly in this church was how engaged the laity was. Very strong engagement across. Volunteerism was really high. And they seemed to have a special connection with the pastors that were there. So the pastors were very good at connecting with the parishioners and developed strong relationships there. And they did a good job of shrinking the distance between the laity and the priest. The idea that the priest was there to did the ministry and was there to minister to everybody had to be changed. The idea here was now everybody was ministers, and they were all about working for the church in the area of ministry. And they worked very hard to train lay people to make sure that they were ready to do ministry. So 3 times a year, they'd have these leadership summits. These leadership summits included 70 to 100 people, lay people in the church, and they would be really intentional about training them with the kind of skills that they needed in order to minister. Changing the culture was probably the hardest thing that the priests had to do. Very strong entrepreneurial leadership, and they had to work very hard from changing the idea that people came to be ministered to, and instead they were coming now to minister. And that that change required them to get the lay people to understand that they were not spectators, they're not pew warmers. Their job is to come in there and instead of being welcomed, to be welcomers. Instead of being ministered to be ministers. And the priest at the time worked very hard toward this. One of my favorite stories from this time is the former priest went up to the front and said, I think you got, soon after the parish was built, went up to the front and said, in a mass, he said, how many of you think I have a really hard job of changing the culture of this parish? And, you know, people in the audience were nodding, and he says, then I quit. And he walked away from the pulpit. And he came back soon afterwards and said, unless we're all doing this together, unless we're all ministers together here, there's no way I can do this. So you all have to get on board. Key to a strong organizational identity in the research is the notion of having both distinctiveness and continuity. This parish is very intentional about not looking evangelical. They're very intentional about being Catholic, and they defend the Catholic nature of what they do. So that's the continuity piece. They're very strongly connected to their Catholic culture and identity. But they also are very innovative. They're willing to take outside ideas and craft them in such a way that allows them to work within a Catholic parish. So this willingness to change and adapt, particularly during COVID, is something we noticed. They quickly pivoted to go online. They were ready for that. And so the innovation is very strong, but also strong sense of continuity with the history of the parish. The game plan. This is all over the parish. This is really simple, and all the people we talked to understood the game plan and what it was about. So I'm going to go over it very quickly about what drives this parish. There you talk about Discover Jesus, and this is largely done through the Alpha program, but a variety of other ways where evangelization is really key to the focus of this church. They want to grow together, life groups. Everyone's expected to go through Alpha, even if you've been there at the parish forever. You're expected to go through Alpha. After that, you're expected to be in a life group and grow together in discipleship. And then after that, you're expected to do things like lead Alpha and these life groups. They talk about the Sunday obligation there. It is not your Sunday obligation to show up and sit in a pew. Your Sunday obligation involves volunteering and giving. Everybody's expected to give their time and their resources toward the work of the kingdom. Serve others. One of the interviewers we talked about said, we are about a high welcome and a high expectation. There's not pew warming expectations. Everybody's expected to be involved, and people very quickly catch the culture, right? They get there and they begin to say, everybody else is involved, how come I'm not involved? And they quickly begin to get involved because it's just norm at the church to do so. And then finally, of course, they are about making missionary disciples. They're about going out and serving their community in both acts of mercy and, of course, evangelization. And that's the focus and goal that drives this parish.